Thank you and good morning, everyone. As Holly said, my name is Prudence Magejo. I'm from the Investor of the Witwatersrand. Today I present joint work with Olivier, Miracle, and Javier titled Inclusive Growth in South Africa, Inequality Dynamics and the Roles of Trade Openness versus Tax Policies. So because of time, I'm just going to go straight into the presentation. So globalization is a well-known source of inequality both within and across countries. And our interest here today is looking at the role of globalization in shaping earnings inequality within countries. And according to trade theories, we know that trade openness can lead to wage dispersion through firm heterogeneity and worker sorting, whilst taxation can compensate for these market-driven inequalities, mainly through its progressivity. So looking in the literature, there's limited evidence on the relationship or the role that trade openness play together with taxation in shaping inequality within countries and using microdata. So for this study, we look at the role of these double forces within South Africa, mainly because of three reasons. So the first thing is that South Africa is a good case study for this analysis because it's got administrative data which is available, which allows us to do robust micro-characterization of these two factors using administrative data. And then the second reason why South Africa is that it is the most unequal country in the world, which is well known for its persistent levels of inequality. And then lastly, we know that South Africa has been open to international trade for a long time, and its integration in the global economy has accelerated over the past 2 decades. But empirical evidence suggests that these gains are not equally shared. So there's a possibility of contrasting situations between the extensive and intensive margins of trade. So what do we do in this paper? We examine how trade openness has shaped inequality over the 2012 to 2021 period, and we explore the role of tax policy, potentially its inequality reducing effect. So we take this opportunity using granular data to evaluate the role of these two forces, and our final result involves a visualization of the enhanced gross incident curve decomposition, which shows us the role of tax policy as well as trade in shaping changes in inequality in South Africa. In terms of our empirical approach, our analysis depends on administrative data from the South Africa Revenue Services in collaboration with National Treasury, and this is individual level employee data which is merged to firm data. So we take this information and plug it into tax micro simulation following the personal income tax model for the two extreme periods, which is 2012 and 2021. So our methodology proceeds in 3 steps. In the first step, we estimate trade openness premium and extract the contribution of trade to earnings in South Africa. And then in the second stage, we create counterfactuals using tax simulations, which we then use in the third stage to do a growth incident curve decomposition to highlight the role of trade and tax in shaping inequality. So I'll go straight to the methodology. In terms of step 1, we estimate the following firm-level Mensarian earnings function using pooled data for 2012 to 2021. And our outcome variable here is basically log average daily earnings of workers in firm J at time T. And our main variable of interest is trade, which we measure both at the extensive and intensive margins. So the main interest here is to extract delta, which is the premium of trade openness, and then use it to characterize how trade contributes to earnings inequality in South Africa. I'll skip the rest because of time. And then once we've estimated the premium, we want to extract the contribution of trade to individual earnings for the 2 extreme points in our data, which is 2012 and 2021. So basically, we calculate the contribution of trade openness to each worker's earnings, and then we collapse that at decile level for us to be able to track what is happening at different points of the earnings distribution. Once we have this information, we do tax simulations, and first of all, we do a baseline for 2012, which is scenario 1 star. In this scenario, we take 2012 data, which and use the trade parameters of what actually happened in 2012 as well as the tax code for 2012. And then in scenario number 2, we take scenario 1 and uprate our values to reflect the 2021 values for us to be able to compare over time. And then the third scenario that we take is a counterfactual. We take 2012 data, which is uprated to reflect 21 values, and then we import the 2021 trade situation and adjust our earnings using this contribution of trade openness to earnings, and we hold constant the tax code for 2012. And then in the fourth scenario, we are going to adjust both the trade situation and the tax code to reflect 2021 values, but using 2012 data. And lastly, we have our baseline for 2021, which is 5-star, which shows us what happened in 2021. So once we have all this information, we go to step 3, where we do our enhanced jig decomposition. We first compute the total raw gap, which tells us the differences or the changes that have occurred in gross income over time. So it involves comparison of earnings in 2021 and 2012. And then we extract the trade effect by comparing gross income from scenario 3 to scenario 2 at each decile as denoted by that subscript D. And then for us to extract the tax policy, we compare earnings from scenario 4 and 3, and then our residual, which captures all the other effects that would have influenced changes in income over time as other effects. So just to jump through the descriptive stats in terms of trade openness in South Africa, we see contrasted situations on the extensive margin and the intensive margin. So what we see is that the proportion of firms in open firms has been going down over time, whilst export intensity has been going up. So those firms who are exporting have continued to grow. And then if we track down employment in terms of open firms, what we have here on this diagram is a plot of the proportion of workers in open firms across earnings deciles. And what we see between 2012 and 2021 is that the proportion of workers in open firms has gone down at all points of the distribution, except at the 8th, 9th, and 10th deciles. So what this shows is that top earners are disproportionately located in open firms, and they're the ones who are benefiting from further and more intense openness. So our results from the first stage estimations, we see our premium here when we use the extensive margin just a dummy if a firm is open, whether it exports or imports. And we can see that trade openness plays an important role in shaping earnings in South Africa. And in the second specification, M3, we incorporate trade openness degree, which is basically export value plus imports over gross sales. And again, we see significant premiums that come from trade openness. And then in the last specification, we characterize the type of trade that a firm is doing, whether it's an exporter, an importer, exporter only, or importer only. And then we incorporate as well the associated intensities, and again we see a consistent story that trade is important in giving premiums to those who work in open firms compared to those in closed firms. So as said, we extract this contribution of trade openness to earnings across deciles, and this is what we plot. And as you can see here, that we are holding constant our returns to trade so that we abstract from changes that have happened in terms of prices on the international market. Our aim here is to characterize how changes or shifts in trade openness have shaped earnings in South Africa, and this is what we see. And we see that the contribution of trade openness has increased for workers that are at the top between 2012 and 2021, and it has decreased for workers who are at the bottom of the earnings distribution. So we have this contrasted situation where those who are at the bottom are losing and those who are at the top are gaining. So now to our growth incidence curve. Now we have all our ingredients in place. We present here the growth incident curve for South Africa for 2012 and 2021. And we see that there's been growth in gross incomes at decile 1 up to 3. So at the bottom, there was gross income growth. And then we see a decline in gross income for those who are in the middle from decile 4 up to decile 6. And we again see growth at the top of the income distribution. So based on our 3-step process, we then decompose these changes in gross income into the trade effect, which is the dark blue, and then the policy effect, which is the tax policy changes, which is the white, and then the other effects, which is our residual. So looking at the contribution of trade openness to changes in gross income, we can see that the shifts that have occurred in terms of trade openness in South Africa has resulted in a penalty for workers who are at the bottom of the distribution up to the 8th decile. So they've been penalized by those shifts in the structure of trade openness across firms. Yet those who are at the top in decile 9 and 10 have benefited, and we see that the benefits have accrued more to the individuals at the very top. Then when we consider the role of tax policy, we can see no kick-in of tax policy at the bottom. Perhaps the incomes are very small, they are not being taxed. And then we see some marginal benefits for those who are sitting in decile 6 and 7, perhaps because of the rebates that have been built into the system over time, as well as the medical tax credits. And then lastly, we can see the progressivity of the South African tax system. At the very top, we can see that more and more income is being taxed. So if we concentrate at the last bar, which is at decile 10, we can see that incomes grew by 6%, okay, in the absence of taxation. And the benefits of trade here were about 2%. And then when tax kicks in, we see that it more than offsets the benefits that come from trade, meaning that we have an equalizing effect that is coming from the tax processes. So it's a classic case where we can see inequality enhancing features that come from trade and heterogeneity from the labor market, and tax policy comes in to correct or mitigate those effects. So we've looked at the sensitivity of our results to different model specifications in terms of our trade definitions. And here we have openness and trade degree openness, which is our M3 specification, and the one which is opened up to characterize the different types of trade happening. And we see that our results are stable and consistent. The individuals at the top benefited, and those at the bottom did not benefit as much. So in conclusion, what is our take home? Our take home is that trade openness changes that happened in South Africa over the 2012 to 2021 benefited workers at the top and penalized the low middle class workers, and this contributed to increased inequality. However, the benefit from trade was mitigated by tax reforms in South Africa thanks to its increased progressivity. So I'll end there. Thank you so much.